welcome to the Lahore Museum.
Hello, hello.
It's good to see you here. So yes, like you know, so if we're standing in front of the Lahore Museum, it houses 5,000 years of our history and culture.
Can't wait to see it.
Yes, okay, please come. So this is a building which was built in 1894. And the main people involved with it were John Lockwood Kipling, who was the curator of the museum and principal of the Mayo School of Arts.
And the father of Rudyard Kipling.
Yes, absolutely, yes.
Who wrote Kim. And the Kim's gun we have just seen outside.
His idea was to have an institution which combined a museum and an art school. So the students could come into the museum, learn from their history, heritage, their arts, craft, culture.
And the famous art school NCA, National College of Arts, is next door.
Yes.
So there's a sort of long-standing relationship between Pakistan's most important museum and its premier art school. What's incredibly striking is the exterior, the facade, the entire structure and design of the building and the layout of the grand halls. It's actually very similar to the V&A, and there's touches of the British Museum. Is that the legacy of British architecture and British design?
Absolutely. John Lockwood Kipling himself was an architectural decorator for the V&A before he came here. And he trained many people, chief among them Bhairam Singh, who he later took to England as well. Sort of, you know, he made an India room for the Queen. So this gallery houses our oldest objects. They belong to the Old Stone Age, the Paleolithic age. So you can see tools and implements, scrapers, choppers. And now we come to Mehergarh, which is in Balochistan.
Wow, yes.
So the Mehergarh, this is the
civilization. About 10,000 years.
This is 7,000 to 9,000 years old. So, I mean, that's amazing. And look at the fineness of the pottery, and then they had figurines. This is from Mohenjo-daro. And this city was discovered in the 1920s. Harappa was discovered first, which is in Punjab near Lahore. In that time, they were, the entire city, I mean, there was no huge disparity like in Mesopotamia and in Egypt, that there were these priestly class and kings and ostentatious living and then very poor peasantry, so a lot of disparity. There was none like that. The house, it was connected to a drain, a covered drain, a baked brick drain, and that took out the dirty water and the clean water from the house, and that drain was connected to terracotta pipes within the house. The other thing was that most of the houses had washrooms, bathrooms, as well as the first known flush toilets.
So where is the dancing girl?
The dancing girl is over there, what they call the dancing girl.
This is fascinating. Just tell me the story of the dancing girl.
This tiny figurine is actually huge for Pakistan's identity and Pakistani civilization, because this shows that performing arts were part of our culture, our civilization, our heritage, right from the beginning of the civilization.
The dancing girl is, in terms of what it stands for and in terms of being a woman, has special significance. It has inspired artists and dancers.
Although this is a replica, and the original was taken away by the Indians. And in fact, Pakistani government is trying and negotiating to get the original Mohenjo-daro dancing girl. India doesn't give us Kashmir, maybe they give us our dancing girl.
This is the gallery which represents Hinduism, Jain and Buddhism. This part of Pakistan, Punjab, is very important and sacred for the development of Hinduism, because the great epic poems Mahabharata and Rigved were composed here and originate from this part of Pakistan. And Lahore Museum has a very beautiful collection of objects that represent Hinduism. They were collected from mainly from different temples that belong to parts which are now in Pakistan, and then also various places which are now in India. So as you can see, we have deities representing Parvati, Shiv, Radha, Krishna, Durga and Lakshmi. One of the oldest pieces in the museum is from the 8th century, and it was discovered from a very famous graveyard here called Myani Sahib. Hinduism, of course, was earlier, right? And we had the Ved culture, and from that, that later, what we know as Hinduism now actually developed over a long period of time. The Puranas later and all of that. And then it sort of took the shape of what we familiarly know as the caste system, in which there was this Brahmin class, and then the Kshatriyas and Vaishya and Shudras, and how the priestly class controlled everything, and how the Shudras were marginalized, and then there were the untouchables. So it became a very rigid and system, in which people kind of felt annihilated, and it was not it was not something which was inclusive. Buddhism and Jainism kind of are responses to that thing, actually. So they are contemporary. And Jainism, Mahavir, this is a statue of Mahavir from Haryana. And Mahavir was the spiritual leader of Jainism, and as we know, the Buddha Siddhartha was the spiritual leader of Buddhism, and they introduced sort of equality, inclusiveness, non-violence, and like Buddhism, we know it introduced sort of like we all kind of of course that did away with the concept of God as such, that the way we know it. Basically, talk about nirvana and all of us making an effort in order to reach that enlightenment through good deeds and personal effort as well. So now this is the Gandhara gallery, and this contains some very iconic pieces, very, very important pieces. So this is the fasting Siddhartha. This is when Siddhartha had left his house and was seeking the answer to the suffering of the world. So he tried different methods, and one of them was modification of the body and starving. He thought maybe that through diminishing the body, he might get some spiritual enlightenment. This sort of statue brings out that his state in a very, very dramatic way, actually. So this is the period mostly from the 1st to the 5th century AD, and this is mostly the Kushans. And the Kushans came from what is parts of China now, the borderlands of China, and they and they also brought Hellenistic influences. And when they came to this region, one of their most famous kings, Kanishka, he became Buddhist. And this is the region where, through this art, for the first time, Buddha, the human face of the Buddha was shown. Before that, it was all shown in symbols.
So the first human depiction of the Buddha took place in Gandhara in Pakistan?
Yes, absolutely.
Wow, that's pretty impressive. And what is that?
That is a stupa. Stupa is this structure that they made, which housed initially the relics of Buddha and his ashes, but later in the relics of any kind of a person or deity. This is a monkey, and he is offering this pot of honey to Buddha. And so what he does is, after offering, when he's leaving the place, he just doesn't want to take his eyes off Buddha. So he turns his head and he's walking out, and he's still looking at Buddha, and he falls in a ditch and dies. So then in his next life, he's born as a Brahmin.
Wow.
Yeah. This is called the miracle of Saravasti.
Right, and who is Saravasti?
And this is a place, but it's also now interpreted as Sukhavati heaven. So there are two interpretations, but see, this is one piece of stone, and look at the intricate carving. And what they say, there was a miracle that Buddha performed because when what his teaching was challenged. So he kind of levitated. He's sitting on a lotus, he levitated, and then little Buddhas came out, actually.
And this is one of my favourite bits, because this is the Greeks who, like most places, they turned up here, didn't they? So this is Alexander's time?
Probably it's with followers, but this probably came from a Greek temple. Those are the dominant poses in Gandhara, actually, then called mudras. But later Buddhism kind of developed many more poses, but over here we have these four: the meditation, the reassurance, the preaching, and the earth, calling the earth to witness.
Thailand's got a very famous, obviously, collection of Buddhas and the holy temples.
Yeah.
Where does this stand in contrast to that kind of period in that collection?
Buddhism reached Thailand from Gandhara to China and Tibet and Korea, Japan, all of those regions,
And who's this fine-looking man?
This is Maitreya, actually. This is the future Buddha.
If you stand here,
yeah,
you've got the Greeks, you've got the Hindus next door, you've got Buddhist, we're going to Persian and Islamic.
Yeah.
I mean, it's one of the most multicultural countries on the planet.
Absolutely.
Islam made a big impact on this region.
Absolutely,
and
yes.
not only in terms of controlling the region or being the rulers, but also in the culture and art and even science, I believe.
Yes. This is an astrolabe, and this was used to measure, it was like an inclinometer, and used to measure the position of stars. Al-Biruni came in with Mahmud Ghaznavi during the 11th century, and he wrote a book of comparative religion at that time. He's the person who is credited with discovering specific gravity, and then he also went to a place called Nandana, which is close to Islamabad, where he measured the circumference of the earth,
right,
which deviates only by 10.44 miles from the modern measurements.
Shahid, Samira, I'd like to just go into a little bit of detail about the story of Muhammad bin Qasim and the Umayyad Caliphate. I believe he arrived here 8 AD, and he was the first significant arrival of Islam.
Well, he was the first major arrival, but he was not a preacher or who was trying to impose Islam. He represented the rising trading power of Arabs of those regions.
This is a Kashikari.
What's striking about this is the colour, the laser cobalt blue, the iconography.
They used to use cobalt for this blue, and interestingly, the Chinese pottery, the white and blue pottery, they learnt it from here. The use of the blue color in their pottery. They used in shrines, and now in modern architecture, people are using it. You can see different kinds of designs over here, floral as well as geometric. And also calligraphy over here, or writing, poetry. Since
in Islam, the visual representation of human figures is not encouraged or sometimes not allowed. So they focused on the motifs and designs and calligraphy, intricate miniature or other geometrical designs. So these are a very special contribution, you can say, of Islam in India.
It seems to me there's some similarities with Christianity in Europe during, during medieval times, where there was sensitivity about iconography and portrayals of saints, and there seems to be some similarity within Islam. And also, I gather the Shia tradition is much more relaxed.
In Islam, it's a mixed kind of thing. Like you said, the Shia tradition is more relaxed about portraiture. Then, we're talking about religious portraiture, right? Otherwise, you will see, and you've seen that the miniature painting tradition is so rich over here. So kings and queens and common people, all of that, no problem. We have these musical instruments, which Muslims have a huge contribution. Sitar, was invented by them, and then we have rabab and tabla. So the musical literacy of the Muslims is immense in the subcontinent.
Amir Khusro was a great person to contribute poetry, first like Urdu, Hindi poetry, and then instruments like sitar and then ragas. He invented so many ragas.
Is this a legacy that Nusrat Fateh Ali Khan has inherited and built on? In
fact, Amir Khusro was one of the first poets whose poetry was or is used by the Qawwals, like Nusrat Fateh Ali Khan and others. And the devotional element of Qawwali music is a tradition which has made huge creative contribution to Indian music and Indian culture.
Okay, these are beautiful. Tell us what these are, Samira.
So the different arts and crafts introduced by the Muslims, they included woodwork. So we have enameling, we have engraving, chasing. This is paper mache from Kashmir. This is the three scenes from Christ, from Nativity, from Jesus Christ's birth, actually. And these are from Iran, and it is needlework which they've made, and there's Jesus and Mary and Zechariah in this. So this is from when the Muslims were here.
But it shows a kind of acceptance of Christianity as an indigenous faith that's part of the culture, the soul, the heritage of the region.
All Abrahamic religions, including Christianity and Jesus, they are considered holy and a part of Islamic beliefs also.
But that courtesy, of course, is not extended to Hinduism, which is not seen in a similar way to Islam as a kind of Abrahamic faith. And is that...
Yeah, not really, but Darashko tried that.
Right.
His book called Mingling of Oceans, Majma'ul Bahrain, which the thesis of that book was that Hinduism is also a sacred religion, and in fact the Hindu texts are the hidden books which Quran had predicted. In fact, he was tried for apostasy because of that and executed.
Which is the famous play that you wrote and was made at the National as well. I just want to not leave this room without hearing a little bit more about these magnificent murals and what they are and what they represent.
These are made by the great Jain. He was one of our greatest painters. These are different verses from the Quran, actually. This is calligraphy. Sort of, you know, he did a lot of calligraphy also, and he did other kinds of work as well, which we have in the
And they're all around as well.
But
they're all around us.
Interesting thing about Jain is that the calligraphy is not just calligraphy. It's painting also, and the way he composed the images, and he mixed then human forms and calligraphy. So it's a good amalgamation of the Islamic art of calligraphy and modern painting.
What was his story? When did he make his work? Where was it?
This was largely in the 70s, and he was a fakir kind of person. Very simple, not at all materialistic, totally consumed by his creativity, his art. And so, you know, there's so many stories about him that he would be just sitting with you and he would just draw something and just leave it for you, you know. And he used to live in the museum at that time.
Fact,
he lived in the museum?
Yes, he stayed
in
here.
fact, Anwar, when he was living in the museum, I made a documentary on Khan. I stayed with him and saw him work when he was painting this huge mural. And fascinating. All he wanted was a bottle of alcohol and nothing else. No other ambition in life.
Well, let's go and talk a bit more about the Mughals and their impact here.
And now we're standing in front of this door from Akbar. Akbar's time was the third Mughal emperor.
How did the story of the Mughals and their arrival and their cultural impact is huge on this land. So can you both just tell me a little bit about that?
Like other invaders from north and northwest, Babur also came and basically escaping from his enemies and his rivals in Afghanistan. But then when he came to India and conquered part of it, and including Delhi, he liked the weather, 4 seasons, and liked the people, the culture, and decided to stay on. And he is considered as the founder of Mughal dynasty. He was followed by Humayun. Humayun unfortunately had a setback, and he was defeated by another Muslim ruler, Sher Shah Suri, also from Afghanistan. The main figure in Mughal dynasty is Akbar. Akbar the great emperor, who ruled most part of India, and after Ashoka, his Indian empire was the biggest. And he also recognized the importance of interaction and mingling with the Indian population, mostly Hindu or non-Muslim. And he then gradually, he had his councils, like council of advisors, 9 of them called Nauratan, and many of them were Hindu, and they had a very important position in Akbar's court. He was followed by Jahangir, who is more famous or infamous for his drunken habits, his love for opium and his love for liquor, but also known for his great buildings, which he built, gardens and buildings. His own mausoleum is in Lahore called Maqbara Jahangir, Jahangir's mausoleum, which is a favorite picnic spot for people of Lahore. And he was also admired for his sense of justice. And then comes Shah Jahan, the great emperor who built Taj Mahal. in memory of his wife Mumtaz Mahal, and it's regarded as a symbol or the ultimate metaphor for love. Shah Jahan is remembered for his gardens and buildings and forts which he built. And then comes a very dramatic moment in Indian history, and that is the war of succession between Shah Jahan's sons. The main fight was between Aurangzeb, the third son of Shah Jahan, who was a fundamentalist, a bigot in fact, but a great commander, a wily commander, quite Machiavellian in his approach, but also observant of Islamic rituals and saying prayers and using Islam as a political weapon.
अगर आज के वाक़यात पर हमने कमजोरी या तज़ब्ज़ुब का मुज़ाहरा किया तो हुकूमत के बागियों को शय मिलेगी और न्याय में हमारा मकान और हमारा दबदबा और भी कमजोर पड़ जाएगा। पहला मामला है उस बदबख्त दारा का, उसका क्या किया जाए? वो दरगुजर का वक्त कब का गुजर चुका है। अब सिर्फ दो ही रास्ते हैं, अमर क़ैद या सज़ाए मौत।
On the other side was the crown prince, the eldest son of Shah Jahan, Dara Shikoh. Dara was a Sufi, he was a poet, he was a painter, he was a scholar of comparative religion, popular among the people.
Now, the play Dara, set in Mughal India, is the tale of two heirs to the Muslim empire fighting each other for succession. The drama channels two virtual characters. A new production of the Pakistani play has now opened at the National Theatre, as Fatma Manji reports.
I am Shah Jahan's crown prince, Emperor Dara.
Brothers in battle, princes vying for power. Dara is an epic tale based on the real history of the Mughal Empire. The Mughals were a Muslim dynasty who ran India for more than 300 years and were eventually ousted by the British. But in telling the story of a historical struggle, two versions of Islam through the two characters are also presented. Dara is supposed to be, first of all, sort of loyalties with the
state. Decisive fight with Aurangzeb was not just a fight between two contenders for power, but also a conflict between two interpretations of Islam, two worldviews, two ideologies. So in this battle, for a more enlightened, more peaceful and a more inclusive form of Islam, and an exclusive and narrow-minded and violent interpretation of Islam. Unfortunately, that struggle still goes on.
Yes, and sort of continuing with his legacy, like you've mentioned, that he was a person who imposed a rigid version of Islam. He discouraged art, particularly pictorial art, which had reached great heights during previous Mughal rulers, and so painting declined in the Mughal court. However, something very interesting emerged from that, because a lot of those painters were dispersed and were taken up by the Rajas of hill states. This is one particular school that emerged from it. There were other things as well. However, this one particular school, which is very well represented in Lahore Museum, is the Punjab Hill States School of Art. And it was...
That's called Pahadi
That's
school?
called Pahadi School. So you see these fantastic paintings, they're so vibrant over that these belong to the 18th century, you know, a lot of them, but the colors stand out.
What do the colors stand for? They're very striking colors.
Yes, very beautiful, and they're all natural colors. So sort of yellow is the color of springtime, and blue represents Krishna, and red is the color of passionate love.
So this is a mixture of Hindu, Muslim, or even Sikh sort of contribution to this school.
Yeah, Sikh came later, and Sikh also had their own miniature school, which was also certainly influenced by the Mughal miniaturists. We start Sikhism from Guru Nanak Singh, who was the founder of Sikhism, and he was a person who was actually trying to probably not formulate a new religion, but kind of, you know, it was reforming and bringing together. He was talking to Muslims, he was talking to Hindus, he was born in a Hindu family, and talking about, again, about sort of, you know, rigidities that had come into society, the inequality that had come into society, how the priestly class was dominating. So he was talking more about love and about humanity and about people and simplicity and direct relationship with God. That was Guru Nanak Singh. And the interesting story about him is that when he died, the Muslims were claiming him to be Muslim and the Hindus, there's a legend about him.
And in fact, most of Guru Granth Sahib, a lot of it is actually includes poetry by great Muslim Punjabi poets like Sheikh Farid.
Yeah, exactly, absolutely.
In 1947, when Punjab was partitioned along with India, then most of the famous and sacred sites of Sikhs, they remained in Pakistani Punjab. And most of the Sikhs had to move to the Indian side of Punjab. So now it's a very sort of unfair situation where Sikhs have to seek a visa and come and visit their sacred sites.
Like Ranjit Singh is buried here in Lahore. Nanak Sahib was born in, Guru Nanak was born in Pakistan. We have Ranjit Singh, who was the biggest name among the Sikh rulers, right? Later, it was in 1799 that he rose to power, and he was a great emperor, yes, and he went up to the Kabul, actually, Peshawar and all of that. And he was a very, very interesting character. He had a French general working with him, an Italian general working with him. He was a man full of curiosity, wanted to learn a lot, and at the same time, of course,
and
he was a
few
despot.
Muslim wives also walking
yes,
with him.
Mora Sarkar. And she was a very strong woman, actually. She was a Muslim, and she exerted quite an influence. So these have been mostly denoted by the Fakir Azizuddin family. Fakir Azizuddin was his court physician, as well as a diplomat and a foreign minister in his court.
So is this period moving towards the arrival of Britain?
Yes. Within 10 years of his death, of Ranjit Singh's death, then the British had already sort of made inroads, and by 1849, Punjab was annexed. And you know, some of his after Ranjit Singh, in this whole Sikh empire, there was a lot of chaos, killing within each other. The British were also involved in it, and then one of his descendants, Dalip Singh, he was actually adopted by the British and sent to UK. And he became very anglicized. So that is then Punjab also came under British sway. So now we are entering this gallery, and we will talk about the arrival of the British to the subcontinent. And I think this is a beautiful piece that shows, actually it's showing the railway, which is, you know, we symbolize, we characterize with the British brought railways to the subcontinent. They came in as merchants, but then started like the typical thing, they started with a mixture of kind of, you know, making alliances, critical alliances, strategic alliances, and also capturing certain places as well. Because we think that railways was a big gift to us also, and of course it's a great thing, sort of, you know, it sort of opens up communication, but however, it was not something that came out of the benevolence of the British.
They pioneered railways, they pioneered canals, and they pioneered irrigation, and that footprint and legacy is all over South Asia. But it wasn't benevolent, it was a tool of empire.
Yes, absolutely.
But it also had benevolent effect.
They started growing cash crops over here, like tobacco, like indigo, and which replaced food crops, which actually gave way to famines also, you see. Great advantage that the British had was in their weaponry, in their technology. So we have this collection of guns ranging from sort of, you know, from different periods of the British rule.
So these are the instruments of colonization.
These are the instruments of colonization primarily, yes. And then we move on to Queen Victoria, who was actually the symbol of empire.
Right.
Yes.
Wow.
She stood, you know, in what is called Charing Cross in front of the Punjab Assembly. That is where the British had placed her. She was removed from there symbolically, and sort of a Quran Sharif has been placed over there.
So this is politically very significant. You can say that it was an assertion of an independent Muslim country, but also it gave way to Islamic fundamentalism in coming years.
The difference between the Mughals and the British is that the Mughals came, and even before them the Sultans, they came and they settled here. They assimilated here. They kind of contributed. They brought in their own culture and civilization, and they took from this culture and civilization. They became part of the subcontinent. The British were here as colonists. They established their through the civil service, which are very few people controlling a huge population.
Actually, Mughals became Indianized, while the British tried to anglicize India. So they introduced English language as the main language. That legacy is still there. And there is an anglicized elite class which prefers to speak in English or follow the English etiquettes, English fashion. And while the vast majority is carrying on with their traditional culture.
Absolutely, that divide still persists, and it's a very dangerous divide. And what we were talking about, you know, the kind of trends, the kind of extremist trends coming here. I mean, a lot of people who feel very disenfranchised, feel marginalized, you know.
Is that a legacy of just Britain, or is that because Britain left, you know, quite a while ago, or is that also contemporary?
You see, the thing is that it continues from British times, but it also is a reflection on people who govern this country, that in all these years, they have not been able to bridge that divide. They wanted to have, because there were Punjabis here, Pukhtuns here, Balochis, Sindhis, people speaking all kinds of languages and very rooted in their language and culture. So because a new country was being created, they wanted a language which was not English, because now we were kind of, you know, getting independence from Britain, but a language that would be a common thread among all of them.
You see, after Pakistan, when Pakistan movement was going on, they needed some slogans to differentiate from the British as well as from the Hindu majority. And so they said one religion, Islam, and one language, which was Urdu. So Urdu was regarded as a language of the Muslims. And then this is what we inherited in Pakistan, although it was not the mother tongue. And Punjabi is more spoken by more people than any other language, but Urdu remains as the national language.
And the culture which spoke Urdu was the dominant culture.
Europe has, broadly speaking, settled its language conflict. Whereas here, language, and which language and which region, it's very live, it's very real.
It was the language movement which started the Bangladesh movement. And Pakistan was divided further in 1971 on the language issue, because Bengali was being denied. They were language of the majority.
These are plaques which are sort of, you know, commemorating the 50 men, nameless men who fought in the Great War, their Great War.
But from one village.
And so there are lots and lots of people, so many people went from the Punjab. In our library, in the museum library, we have whole registers which have sort of, you know, records of all the people who went from which village, actually, you see.
Why did 1 million British Indians fight for a colonizing power for a war in Europe? What made them do it?
They were part of the military initially, and then of course I think there were enlisting also going on. They were the dominant power, the British, you see. There were some people who were against it, like Subhash Chandra Bose, you know, who said that Britain is our sort of ruler, and we're trying to get independence from Britain, so we'll join with the Germans.
In the European narrative, and particularly in the Hollywood narrative, where so much emphasis is put on Dunkirk and the Battle for Arnhem and D-Day, whereas the British Indian forces, they fought in Hong Kong and Singapore and Burma and Egypt and in the Mediterranean. So this huge contribution that helped the Allied forces win World War II has been one airbrushed quite significantly out of history. And the other thing that its dominant legacy, it seems to me, is the Pakistani army and the Indian army still have the regimental structures and the, if you like, the order and planning of the British Army model. Is that correct?
Yes, that's absolutely correct.
In fact, when Pakistan was created, they divided the Indian army into Pakistani and Indian army, and they were from the same regiments and same divisions.
We're standing in front of this huge painting which shows the last battle between the East India Company and Tipu Sultan from Mysore. He's gone into legends because he gave a very, very tough resistance to the British, and he kind of died fighting. And for the British also, defeating Tipu Sultan was like a big statement that they made. So now we move into this gallery which kind of, you know, depicts the War of Independence 1857 and the heroes of that war. As we know that there was a Muslim as well as the Hindu soldiers rioted against the British in this war, and it was very cruelly quenched. So that is when the British consolidated their rule, and then, you know, the British were there, they were ruling, and they started their own educational system. The English language became dominant because the British were, the Muslims were the last rulers before the formal rulers before the British came.
That's an interesting character,
yeah.
Sayyid Ahmad Khan. And he was the one who started this, what is called Aligarh movement.
Yes.
Which urged Muslims of India to learn English, to join English, to accept their employment in army or civil. He himself was a judge. And he, as it is said, that laid down the foundation of the later day Pakistan movement.
He encouraged the Muslims to come into the mainstream.
He was more liberal and he believed in science, and he tried to interpret Islamic teachings in the context of modern day of science and modern day politics. So some extremists don't like him at all.
Muslims wanted security and safety. They did not know what was going to happen actually, what was independence going to bring to them. So because they were a minority now. And then, so like you would see that these are pictures that are commemorating and bringing out the Muslims, right, at different stages. In this gallery, we don't see Nehru. Of course, he was part of he was extremely important, very...
he stayed back in India.
He stayed back in India.
The giants of the time, Nehru, Gandhi and Jinnah, and how they're reflected, and obviously it's going to be biased towards Jinnah because this is the Lahore Museum in Pakistan, but a little bit about their story.
In fact, Gandhi and Jinnah, they were not only leading two communities or two parties, but personally also they were very different, poles apart from each other. Gandhi was hardly wearing anything, while Jinnah was suited, booted, gentleman in the English style, a barrister. And Pandit Nehru, interestingly, was a socialist, and he was a modern politician who really represented the modern day India. And unfortunately, both leaders, Jinnah and Gandhi, died very soon after the partition.
Samara, what do you think, if Jinnah was stood here today, what would he make of Pakistan today?
I know that Quaid-e-Azam certainly would not be happy with what is happening. This is not what he envisioned actually.
Yes, he would be shocked. But I believe similarly, if Gandhi came into life, he would be shocked to see Modi's India, where Muslims are being killed just because they eat cow meat. And if, for example, Abraham Lincoln came to life in Trump's America, I think he will want to go back to the other world very quickly. And maybe if Churchill was alive, he will be shocked to his bits to see Britain voting for Brexit.
I think the British role has to be emphasized because they were kind of, they just dumped this place. Actually, such complex situation. Things have come to a head. The communities which are vying for their rights as well as asking for independence. Centuries of colonial rule, which kind of, keeps all the plurality kind of, under a lid. And then suddenly you decide that you want to leave without resolving these issues. And asking Radcliffe to come and draw a line as if what is the cake or what, and he has no experience of these things. And just across the map, and just that's it basically. So, and that's why all those terrible kind of massacres happened, and that movement when people moved from here, from that part and this part, migration.
As we're in the Museum of Independence and Partition, would you both to give me a very quick summary of the legacy of the violence and the slaughter and the ethnic cleansing and the genocide of partition, and that legacy today?
Well, the violence, of course, had horrendous impact on the culture and the psyche of people on both sides, especially those who were directly affected in Punjab. So that the violence through the first-hand stories of the generation affected by partition has been passed on to younger generations. But as far as the people are concerned, especially the younger generation, they don't have that kind of trauma. So they want to overcome it they have similar ambitions, they have similar interest in becoming a modern members of a modern society, and they are reaching out to each other through art, through music, through film, through theatre.
Young people are really not concerned with what happened and what didn't happen, and they just want to move ahead. They want to forge sort of, productive alliances with sort of, within their country, outside their country. They share so much with India in terms of their interest, Bollywood, and the songs that sort of in every wedding in Pakistan, we have Indian songs. Yeah. So the thing is,
so that's fascinating. Yeah. What you're saying is the legacy is less raw with the greater part of the population, but the political and military establishment, the legacy seems to be everything in terms of the hostility today.
So we're now sitting in the Contemporary Art Gallery of the Lahore Museum, and we're sitting in front of three very important paintings. These are the pioneers of modern art in Pakistan, Zubaida Agha and Zain al-Abidin and B.N. Sania. And over there again we have Zain al-Abidin and Amrita Shergill. She's become a legendary figure, actually. Okay. As you can see that modern painting in Pakistan, there's a lot of presence of women in it. And it continues to the present day, actually, because the contemporary paintings, there are lots of very prominent women like Shahzia Sikandar and Aisha Khalid. And so, then they bring their own ethos, their own kind of subject. And then, of course, the National College of Arts in Lahore is the main art institution. It's dominated by many women principals of the National School of Arts, and very, very prominent, and women who have contributed a lot, like Miss Salima Hashmi, who herself is a painter, Ms. Nasir Al-Tawla, she's an artist, and Sajda Wandel.
And this is interesting because we've had exhibitions of contemporary Pakistani visual arts practice and visual installations and video installations in, galleries in New York, in London. The Pakistani art market is worth, tens of millions. How's that developed?
Now we have a range of artists like Imran Qureshi as well, and Rashid Rana, and they've been exploring a lot of their own sort of, place in the society. They've been exploring violence in the society. They've been exploring their own identity. Women have been sort of, pursuing feminist issues in their art. So a lot of contemporary issues that the artists deal with are showing up in their work, actually. And a lot of them have kind of, made a mark internationally, and their work has been shown in many, many places. It's in kind of the auction houses. Bonhams just recently had an auction that was solely Pakistani art, actually.
So what's particularly fascinating for me is the role of Pakistani women in culture. And it's often been said that Pakistani's best people are its women. And people like Ashma Jahangir, Salima Hashmi, Benazir Bhutto, Malala Yousafzai, bless her, Sabine Mahmood and Praveen Raman. And it seems to me there's almost a power struggle going on of women asserting themselves both through visual arts, through politics. Is that playing out in art collections?
This museum is reflective of what the women of Pakistan have contributed to art and culture.
Then outside the museum, in the fashion world, women are leading and dominating. In the media, they are playing a very important role as anchors or as producers. And then in theatre and filmmaking, documentary filmmaker Sharmeen Ubaid Chinoy, who won Oscar twice.
You're an institution, a Joker Theatre, of a very long-standing establishment institution, and you, Samira, represent a very important visual arts, heritage, antiquity collection in the greatest museum, perhaps. And what is the relationship between your institutions and the next generation? Coke Studios, the artists coming out of NCA, and that generational, the future culture?
Well, interestingly, Coke Studio or similar projects, they have played an important role in promoting popular culture, introducing folk artists, folk musicians.
नजर का धोखा ये दिलों का सौदा आतिश मोहब्बत का ये गर्म झोंका तू जाने ना.
And this devotional culture is very strong in the masses of Pakistan. If you go and visit like
and is that contemporary culture?
Yes, it is very contemporary in terms of the fact that young people are there and they are dancing and singing and relating to their heritage. So these two things are going in parallel.
This museum is a public sector museum. It's highly subsidized. I mean, the people, like I mentioned before, people from all walks of life throng this museum actually, right? And in terms of sort of, you know, and we've also tried sort of to kind of put up exhibitions which bring out our culture, our history, because we have contemporary sections also, but our kind of role is also to bring out and interpret and have a dialogue sort of, you know, with people regarding sort of our legacy, our heritage. So we put up an exhibition in collaboration with UNESCO, which brought out the culture of the Indus Valley civilization, which was hugely popular. And in that actually educational institutions were involved, and young people contributed to that exhibition. They made designs and they
So that's interesting. So contemporary, whether it's textiles or designers or artists or, you know, Pakistan Fashion Week, which has become a big brand now, they have a relationship with an institution like Lahore Museum where modernity is being influenced by heritage and history.
Yes, absolutely, because like I said that a lot of jewelers and people who make in women actually who make in jewelry, they are very interested. They've been actually contacting me and coming here and kind of, you know, looking at the
handicrafts, for example.
Yes, exactly. And then they, of course, make innovations. Then they make all these innovations, juxtapose the modern with the traditional.
Shahid, how does the contemporary world respond in terms of practice to a fast-changing world? Is Pakistan's changing?
Yeah, the world is changing fast and Pakistan is changing faster. The only problem is with Pakistan is that it is moving in opposite direction. There is an extremist way which wants to take things backward, and there is a contemporary modern trend which wants to take things forward.
Is there a third way?
Well, there is a third way, which is to keep the balance, which is what we do in Ajoka Theatre. We try to use international experience or expertise as in theatre, and we then link it with our traditional themes, our folklore, our contemporary issues, and present a product which is acceptable to all classes, people with a Western theatre taste and people with a folk theatre taste, or people with no theatre taste.
You see, the thing is that sort of going back to the exhibition, I mentioned that it linked the practice of a contemporary potter, Shehzad Alam, right? She carries on the legacy of Harappa in her work that is shown. She runs a school for little young children who kind of, you know, make pottery, and sort of she teaches them about Harappa and how it is kind of, you know, has a meaning in their lives right now, actually.
This 5,000 years of heritage, of legacy, is quite a heavy burden, but we are trying to carry it.
I want to just ask you two very cheeky questions to finish. What would Mr. John Lockwood Kipling and his son make of yourself and how the museum is run today?
Right.
And what do you think the museum's future role is?
There was actually an exhibition recently in V&A which kind of, you know, traced Mr. Kipling's legacy, and so I suppose he would want to stress the educational aspect of the museum much more than it is being done at present.
Fantastic.
I think Kipling would be happy to see the way museum is being run, and also the way National College of Arts, the Mayo School of Arts, is being run.
Wonderful.
These are two islands of our heritage and our culture and our link with the outside
They're a
world.
massive depository of knowledge. What do you think, Samara, the role of this vital cultural institution, the museum, is for the future of Pakistan?
I think it is central to sort of, you know, to our identity, this museum. It's a microcosm of who we are and what about in our history. And I think this museum and its wonderful collection and its diverse collection each object has so much to say and speak, and the linkages, you know, among all of these. So this museum, it is an unending source of education, of bringing communities together, of fostering dialogue, and of sort of, you know, understanding ourselves and others.
This institution is a microcosm of what we were and what we should be and what we will be.
Yeah.
That's a very nice note to end on. Thank you both, Shahid Nadeem and Samira Samad, for guiding me around.
Okay, well, Thank you so much, Sumaira, for a wonderful
pleasure.
tour. Let me treat you, Anwar, Sumaira, to sumptuous Lahori food at the food street in Purani Anarkali.
Well, one thing I noticed, so this road, which is the heart of Lahore, was built by the British. And is there a similarity with Charing Cross? But it feels like it. It feels like the boulevards of Paris.
This goes to Charing Cross.
And it's the historic centre of Lahore?
Yeah,
or
it is,
last century Lahore?
Of modern Lahore.